Big Shaq walked into his old neighborhood gym, now rebranded, polished, and run by a rude gym trainer, who mocked him on sight. No one knew the history. No one cared. Until Big Shaq stepped up, said nothing, and did what only legends do. What followed left the entire gym in stunned silence, because when Big Shaq responds, the whole room listens. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Atlanta felt different now. Not just because the skyline had changed, or because the street names near Auburn Avenue were gentrified into boutique-sounding syllables. It was the air, cleaner, sharper, but colder. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his blacked-out SUV on a side street off Edgewood, staring at the building. Across from him, a tall, angular box of modern concrete and glass, backlit with neon accents that pulsed with corporate swagger. The Core, it said in matte black lettering above the door. Underneath, premium strength and conditioning, elite only. He let the engine idle a moment longer. The radio played softly, a gospel track, his mother's favorite. The chorus repeated, "You are not forgotten." He cut the ignition, stepped out. The old rec center was gone, paved over and silenced. This place, this new age temple to aesthetics and algorithms, stood where once a crooked hoop had leaned against a brick wall, where kids shot free throws barefoot on a court with more cracks than lines. He remembered that court, remembered the heat under his soles, remembered the day his mother brought oranges in a reused grocery bag, because no one had money for Gatorade. He hadn't been back since the original building was condemned, not in over 15 years. Inside, the air was clean, filtered, the kind of filtered that stripped out not just dust but memory. The scent was eucalyptus and bleach. Music thumped in the background, an electronic beat, empty of emotion, perfect for influencers and cold-hearted reps. A front desk associate looked up. She was young, early 20s, blonde hair coiled in a bun, so tight it looked artificial. She didn't smile. "Hi there, you got a check-in code?" she asked, fingers still on the keyboard. Shaq lowered his hood, nodded once. Pre-registered under O'Neal, guest access. She blinked once, glanced at her screen. "1 sec. Then after a beat, "Okay, I see you. But just so you know, we have body comp tests today. Might not be the best day for a drop-in. You sure you want to be here?" Shaq nodded again. "I'm sure." Her eyes darted over his shoulders and back to the monitor. "Okay. Studio B is open, but you might not find anything your pace. We run pretty elite programming." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The hallways were lined with chrome-trimmed mirrors and brushed steel benches. Every room pulsed with curated energy, the kind that made people feel like avatars of themselves. Shaq walked slowly, his frame taking up space in ways the building clearly hadn't anticipated. Heads turned, some from curiosity, some from irritation. No one said his name. Not once. He entered Studio B. A few dozen people scattered through stations, treadmills, kettlebells, platforms. No posters on the walls. Just LED displays looping promo clips. Perfect bodies lifting perfect weights. The equipment gleamed. Too clean, too untouched. He picked up a resistance band and started stretching. That's when he saw him, Griffin Knox. The gym's alpha. Tall, lean, and surgically confident. Griffin had the stride of a man who believed mirrors existed for him. His voice cut through the music as he coached a group of 3. A wiry teenager, a nervous middle-aged man, and a woman built like a sprinter. "Focus, Jeremy. You're not here to play. You're here to upgrade. Let's push past the average. All right?" He looked up and locked eyes with Shaq. For a moment, there was stillness. Shaq held his gaze, unreadable. Griffin tilted his head slightly. He smirked, then turned back to his class. After a few minutes, as Shaq moved to the weighted sleds, Griffin walked over. "Yo, big man, you lost?" Shaq looked at him. Griffin continued, "Only reason I ask is, we usually don't get former security guards in here. This a lunch break thing?" Laughter from behind him. One of his clients chuckled nervously. Shaq said nothing. He pushed the sled forward. Slow, control. Griffin wasn't done. "Seriously though, no hate. Respect the hustle. But this ain't Planet Fitness, you know. We curate performance. It's a mindset. You might want to start with Studio C." Shaq finished the set, turned around. "You always judge books by the dust jackets?" Griffin blinked. Nah, man. Just, we got a certain culture here. Vibe check, you know. Shaq nodded once. Right. Culture. He walked past Griffin. Kept his pace slow. Measured. By the time he reached the water station, a few members were whispering. One was scrolling on her phone. No one said his name. He exited the studio and wandered toward the back. An old habit took over. Scanning exits, layouts, details. That's when he saw it. A hallway with old black and white photos, framed along the wall. A nod to history, probably designed by someone in branding. The plaques were sleek, minimalist. One frame stopped him cold. A wide-angle shot of the original community center court. Cracked concrete, chain-link fence. 6 kids frozen mid-jump as a tattered basketball hovered mid-air. And in the back, barely noticeable, a tall, skinny teenager, half-shadowed, barefoot, hands on his hips, watching the game. Shaq leaned in. He didn't need to read the caption. He remembered the photographer who came that day. Remembered the fight that broke out an hour later when one of the white kids called his friend a slur. He remembered how his mother pulled him back before he threw a punch. "Let them see you rise," she had whispered. Now, here he stood, staring at that ghost in the photo, hung on a wall like decor. No one had known it was him. No one had even asked. He stepped back. "Cool shot, huh?" It was the front desk girl again. Her tone was casual, but her posture tense. Shaq nodded. "Apparently that used to be here," she added. "Like the building. Before they redid it. Crazy, right?" Shaq glanced at her. "You don't know who that is?" She squinted. "Some kid from the neighborhood. They say he got drafted or something. Don't think he made it big, though." He smiled faintly. "Right." He left the hallway and returned to the front desk. "Can you print me a copy of today's waiver?" She hesitated. "Sure, but why?" Shaq smiled again. "I like to keep receipts." He left the gym without looking back. Outside, he stood for a long moment under the awning. The air was thick with spring heat, but it didn't bother him. Across the street, the faint shadow of a hoop was still etched in the brick wall of an old building, not yet renovated, faded, forgotten. He walked toward it. His hand brushed the wall under the hoop, where the bricks jutted slightly, the exact spot where he once took his first bank shot. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could smell the orange peels, hear his mother's voice, feel the grit under his feet. When he opened them, he turned back and looked at the gym. Sleek, bright, soulless. But somewhere inside it, on a wall meant to impress visitors, his past was hanging, unacknowledged, misunderstood. That was the thing about history. You could wipe away the paint, tear down the walls, build something new. But the shadows always stay. And sometimes, the shadow walked back through the door. He spotted Shaq before he even finished the set. His eyes narrowed for a brief second. Then the smirk bloomed. "Yo, big guy, nice squat depth for someone in retirement," Griffin called out, voice just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Didn't know we let security guards lift here. Guess that's new." A ripple of awkward laughter spread across the closest few gym-goers. Not all of them understood the insult, but the tone told them it was okay to laugh. Subtle, casual, but not harmless. Shaq racked the barbell without reacting. He didn't look at Griffin, just took a long breath, adjusting the weight clips like nothing had happened. But something had, not just in the room, inside him. The thing about racism, wrapped in comedy, dipped in performance and camouflaged by tone, it didn't hit you like a slap. It bruised like gravity. You could stand tall against it, but the ache always found a place to live. And Shaq had heard versions of that line before, just never from someone so loud, so public, so proudly blind. Griffin turned to his class. A group of 6 stood before him. Fit, ambitious, wide-eyed, young men in their early 20s, women with ankle monitors that counted steps and stress levels. He clapped once. "All right, team. Welcome to Athena Circuit, named after the goddess of war and wisdom. I bring the war. You better bring the wisdom." They chuckled. Some nervously. Griffin was part performer, part trainer, all control. He positioned himself like a preacher at a sermon. "We're building not just muscle but discipline, resilience, dominance. You want to stand out in this world. Be bigger, be sharper, be undeniable." He made a show of pulling his shirt sleeve up, revealing a tattoo that read "Conquer or be raised." Shaq turned away, but not before catching the words. They sat uncomfortably close to something his high school coach once told him, after a benching that followed a racially charged complaint. Learn the game or stay invisible. Shaq moved to the kettlebells. He wasn't going to let one man ruin the rhythm he came here to find. But Griffin wasn't done. Yo, big guy, you training for a football comeback or just trying to stay awake? More laughter. Shaq paused mid-lift. He looked up, finally met Griffin's eyes. That name, big guy. He hadn't heard it in decades. Not since his first college season. The assistant coach used to shout it across practice courts before Shaq was even drafted. It was an endearment then. A respect. Now it felt hollow. Stripped of history. Recycled without knowing. Griffin caught the pause and assumed victory. He strutted closer, casually swiping a towel from the bench beside Shaq. Not hating, he said, mock sincerity coding the words. It's cool to see older cats still putting in work. You just don't want to mess up the vibe we built here. You feel me? Shaq studied him. The way he stood, always slightly elevated. The way his eyes flicked to nearby people for reaction cues. Like every line was rehearsed for likes. There was no dialogue in this place. Just performances. Scripted jabs dressed as charm. Shaq wiped his hands and returned the kettlebell gently to the rack. You built a vibe, he said, voice low, calm. Not a culture. That's different. Griffin blinked, thrown for a second. What's that supposed to mean? Shaq looked past him. Vibes disappear when the music stops. Culture stays when no one's looking. And then he walked away. The silence that followed was brief, but noticeable. Griffin turned back to his class with a stiff grin. Anyway, back to the grind. But not everyone was focused now. A couple of the younger trainees gave Shaq a second glance. Something about the way he carried himself unmoved, measured, stuck with them more than any motivational quote on Griffin's feed. Later that day, as Shaq moved into the yoga studio for cool-down stretches, he noticed a trainer whispering to the front desk girl, pointing in his direction. She tapped something into the computer. He pretended not to notice. By the time he finished his cool-down, he received a soft tap on the shoulder. The studio manager stood there, trying to appear neutral. Hey, just letting you know. Due to capacity and tiered scheduling, we'll need to adjust your access hours. Nothing personal. Just standard policy. Shaq looked at him for a beat too long. Right, he said. Standard. He changed, moved through the lobby, and approached the wall with the old photo again. There he was, that barefoot kid in the background, frozen in grainy grayscale. The caption beneath it now seemed ironic. Local court, 1990s, where greatness begins. No one in the building knew. No one cared. And yet his image hung like mythic wallpaper. He exited into the early afternoon sunlight. As the door shut behind him, he didn't feel anger. He felt clarity. Some places weren't made for remembering. They were designed to overwrite. But what they forgot was that shadows don't disappear. They wait. They grow. And sometimes, they walk right back into the spotlight. The locker room at the core was quiet. Quieter than the rest of the building. Almost clinically so. Like the walls had agreed to swallow all noise on command. There was no music here. No barking trainers. No echo of slamming weights. Just the occasional hiss of the steam from nearby showers and the low hum of the overhead lights. The kind of silence that felt like it had shape. Shaq sat on the wooden bench, in front of the farthest row of lockers. His duffel bag at his feet, towel draped around his shoulders. Sweat clung to his back like old burdens refusing to let go. He hadn't even done much. A few warm-up sets, some band work, a few slow laps around the studio. But the weight wasn't physical. It hadn't been for a long time. His hands, broad and calloused, rested on his knees. He stared ahead at nothing in particular. A point on the wall where the white paint had chipped just enough to expose a scratch beneath. Something about that imperfection felt familiar. On it. It was here, in that sterile, polished stillness, that the memory returned. Not with a jolt, but a slow slide, like an old cassette tape clicking into place. He was 11. The court wasn't even a real court. Just a faded green surface tucked behind a neighborhood center in Newark. A bent hoop with a frayed net. But it was sacred. That day, Lucille had brought him with her. She always said Sundays were for something holy. And if they couldn't make it to church, then she'd bring holiness wherever they went. She sat on the sidelines with a folded chair and a bag of homemade sandwiches. Shaq remembered the smell: peanut butter, banana, and cinnamon sugar. She watched him shoot with quiet joy. Every bounce of the ball was her sermon. But then came the man in the whistle. He wore khakis, and a polo shirt embroidered with the rec center's logo. His shoes were too clean to belong to someone who cared about the game. He walked over, lips already thin with authority, and told her she had to leave. "This court's for members only, ma'am." Lucille stood, her back straightened like someone had pulled it up from the heavens. "My son is a member," she said. "Maybe," the man replied, not looking at Shaq. "But this space isn't for spectators." Her eyes didn't blink. "This space belongs to the children, not to your rules." "I'm asking nicely, ma'am." She looked at Shaq. Her face didn't twist in anger, just resignation. Not weakness, though. The kind of quiet dignity that only black mothers seemed to carry when forced to explain the unjust without infecting their children with it. She gathered her chair, folded the sandwich bag, and before she walked away, she put her hand on Shaq's chest. "You carry weight they'll never see," she whispered. "So you lift with your heart, not your hands." That night, he shot free throws in the dark. Alone. Back in the locker room, Shaq exhaled slowly. The air felt heavier now, like the memory had thickened it. He ran a hand down his face, pushing back the moisture, whether from the workout or the memory. He couldn't tell. He unzipped his bag, pulling out a fresh shirt and reaching for his shaker bottle. Something fluttered out, a small folded piece of paper that drifted to the tile floor. Shaq stared at it for a second before reaching down. It was a note, the kind you'd tuck into a lunchbox or tape to a bathroom mirror. Folded twice, crinkled from the edge of a packed bag. He opened it. "Daddy, I know you're tired. I can feel it even when you try to hide it. But please take care of yourself. Not just your body, your soul too. We only get one you, and this world still needs it. Still needs you. Love me, Ara." There it was. No applause. No highlight reel. Just a daughter's handwritten truth. His hand trembled as he read it again. A man who had lifted trophies, who had towered above roaring crowds, now sat quiet in a luxury locker room, holding a note written in purple ink with a little heart doodle at the bottom. He didn't cry often, not because he was afraid to, just because the tears had been swallowed so many times before. They now arrived like strangers. But this time, they came. Silent. Hot. Brief. He folded the note again, slid it into his wallet. He looked around the locker room, at the brushed steel lockers, the pristine benches, the untouched branding decals. Everything here was built to impress, to intimidate, to make people feel like they were chasing something they'd never quite catch. And still, with all this perfection, no one in this place saw him. They saw the size, the shape, maybe a vague echo of a name they once heard. But not the man, not the weight he carried, not the iron that pressed against his heart every time he walked into a space where his story didn't fit the decor. He stood slowly, grabbing his gear, running the towel once more across the back of his neck. As he moved toward the exit, he passed by a mirror near the sinks. He caught his reflection, but not the one others saw. He didn't see the former NBA star, or the cultural icon, or the viral video presence. He saw a father, a son, a shadow that had outgrown its shape, and no longer fit in the frames others built for him. He paused, placing one hand against the edge of the mirror, grounding himself. Then he whispered, barely audible, "I'm still here, Mom." And with that, he walked out. There were heavier things than iron, and he carried them all. It started small, a ripple in the water, barely a shift in the air. But Shaq felt it the moment he walked into the core that Thursday morning. The glances lingered longer, the smiles were tighter, and the usual indifferent front desk energy had morphed into something clipped, rehearsed. He scanned his key fob at the entrance as usual, but this time it beeped with a red light. The receptionist didn't look surprised. "Hey, so," she began, voice dipped in politeness. "Your guest access came up flagged. Might be a system hiccup." One sec. Shaq stood calmly, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He had spent a lifetime mastering the art of stillness when under scrutiny. The skill hadn't come from fame. It had come long before that, from playgrounds where eyes measured you like threats, and classrooms where silence was survival. Another employee appeared from the side door, thin build, earpiece, laminated badge, too official for a gym. He spoke low to the receptionist, then looked at Shaq with that same tight-lipped expression reserved for people who were already decided upon. "Sir, we're going to ask you to step aside for a moment," he said. "There's been some feedback. Some members have reported feeling uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," Shaq repeated, his voice flat. The man shifted. "Look, it's not about anything specific. Just the vibe. Management wants to preserve a certain kind of atmosphere. Shaq looked past him to the gym floor. Griffin Knox stood near the turf lane, arms crossed, leaning on a sled like it was a throne. Their eyes met. Shaq turned back to the man. So no complaints, just vibes. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just nodded once, picked up his duffel bag, and walked toward the exit like a man who'd seen this scene before and no longer needed the script. But just as he passed the check-in area, a woman, early 30s, tight ponytail, phone in hand, raised her camera and started recording. "Look at this entitled old dude," she said, tone amused, fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "Apparently he thought he was some kind of VIP. People gotta learn clout, don't mean respect." The words stung more because they didn't come from rage. They came from that smug, self-assured place where disrespect wore a smile. Shaq didn't look at her, didn't break stride. He exited the building without a word, the sliding doors parting like a silent judgment. In the parking lot, he paused beside his car. The wind carried the faint scent of pavement and eucalyptus, the Core's signature diffuser blend. He unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and sat still for a long moment. The silence in the car was different from the locker room, more private, more real. He pulled out his phone, eyes scanning the notifications he'd ignored during his brief workout. Nothing important. But one icon blinked. Voicemail, one new message. He tapped it, listened. Lucille's voice filled the car. Warm, familiar, worn from age, but still strong. "Hey baby, it's me. I know you're busy. I just wanted to leave this in case, well, in case the hospital doesn't go the way we want. I just needed to say something. You've spent your whole life building things. Your game, your family, your name. Don't let this world shrink you to something small enough for them to box. You hear me? Don't let them trim your edges just to fit their frame. You're not built for their approval. You're built to last." The message ended with a pause. A breath. As if she were still holding the phone. Shaq sat back in his seat, closed his eyes. The words wrapped around him like armor made of memory. His phone buzzed again. This time a text from an unknown number. "Hey, just saw this. Thought you should know." Below it a link, social media. He hesitated for a second, then clicked. The video was already climbing past 200,000 views. The caption read, "Entitled man gets booted from elite gym for throwing his weight around." He braced himself to watch the clip. But then something strange happened. The comments. They weren't what the poster had expected. "Enola Justice. Wait, is that Shaq? You kicked out Shaq? A history hooper 44. The man literally rebuilt schools and community centers. The disrespect is wild.
Hey, Coach Marvin.
He helped my nephew get a scholarship. Quietly. No press. You really just filmed a legend like that?"
I McCann speaks. That smile from the trainer in the background says everything. This was a setup.
More and more piled in. Hundreds. Then thousands. The video had backfired. Someone else had posted a screen grab, zoomed in on the photo inside the gym. The one from the old rec center. "Wait a minute. Is that him in the photo y'all use for nostalgia branding?" Another explosion of comments followed. Shaq put the phone down slowly, his heart steady. It wasn't satisfaction that filled him. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. They had tried to erase the legend. Not by attacking him, but by reducing him. Framing him as just another large body. Just another silhouette in the background. It wasn't new. It had been happening his whole life, in different forms when they called him articulate, with surprise when they joked about his size in rooms where no one else looked like him, when they asked if he was security, not the keynote speaker. He didn't need the internet to correct the narrative, but he did recognize the power in what was happening. Not the outrage, but the recognition. Something deeper was shifting. Something louder than clout and cleaner than algorithms. It was memory, and truth, and roots refusing to be dug up. He started the engine, rolled down the window. The Core stood across the lot like a monument to filtered ambition. But inside, somewhere on a wall, was still that photo, still that boy, in the shadow. They could build over the court, replace the floor, change the name. But history doesn't fade.
Not when it's lived, not when it's carried,
and not when the legend is still walking. He leaned against his SUV, breathing in the city around him. The sounds of Atlanta had changed over the years. The bass-heavy music from passing cars still hit hard, but now it shared space with scooter wheels, boutique coffee trucks, and the sterile hum of new development. The neighborhood had texture once. Now it felt laminated. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure approaching from the alley just beyond the gym's side lot. A man in navy blue coveralls with a stained rag tucked into his waistband and gloves dangling from his back pocket. He moved slowly, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. "You didn't deserve that," the man said, holding 2 paper cups. His voice was steady but frayed with age. Shaq eyed the stranger, unsure for a second. The man handed him one of the cups. "Don't worry, it's coffee. Real coffee, not that frothy stuff they serve inside. And I ain't poisoned it," he said with a grin. Shaq accepted it, nodding once. "Appreciated." The man leaned against the low brick ledge across from the SUV. "Name's Benton. Benton Reese. I mop up what the rich folks step over." Shaq took a sip. Strong, black, just the way his mother used to drink it before Sunday church. "You were inside, huh?" Benton asked. Shaq didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. "I saw what they did," Benton continued. "Smiling to your face, slashing at your back soon as you pass." He shook his head. "That's why I stay invisible. Can't cut what they can't see." Shaq let the silence hang between them. There was a weight to Benton's words, not just bitterness, experience. "You always work this spot?" Shaq asked. "Been working it since long before they called it the core," Benton replied. "Back when this lot was cracked concrete and dreams slick sweat. You know what used to stand here?" Shaq nodded slowly. "Community Rec Center." Benton gave a low laugh. "That's what they called it on the paperwork. But to us, that place was church, court, home, second chance." Shaq stared down into his coffee. "I remember, my mother used to bring me there every other Saturday. Said it was the one place that never judged our shoes." "I knew I recognized you," Benton said suddenly, the grin widening. "Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal. The boy who used to dunk barefoot when nobody was looking." Shaq looked up, surprised. "You remember that?" "Son, I was the one who used to wipe down that backboard after your first windmill cracked the dust loose." Benton chuckled. "You weren't just tall, you were loud. Not with your voice, with your presence." Shaq's expression softened. Didn't think anyone remembered those days. Benton took a sip from his cup, then looked out at the skyline. "Funny thing about memories. They don't die, they just wait for someone to bring them back." They stood in silence again, the city stretching in front of them like a painting neither of them could quite touch. Then Benton's tone shifted. "You probably don't remember my brother, Darnell Reed." Shaq paused, digging into the edges of his mind. "About your age," Benton continued. "Always had a crooked smile and a messed up shoelace. He was playing ball the day that tornado touched down, 1992. Real ugly one. Sky went black mid-afternoon." Shaq's memory clicked. He remembered a flash of chaos, sirens, shattered glass, people yelling, and a boy thin, panicked, pinned under part of the fence. "You pulled him out," Benton said quietly. "While everyone else ran for cover, you ran toward him. You didn't say anything, just lifted that metal like it was paper. Got his leg free." Shaq closed his eyes briefly. The details came rushing back. The feel of twisted chain link, the boy's gasps, the blood on his own palms. He hadn't thought of it in years. "He had asthma," Benton said, voice trembling just slightly now. "Couldn't breathe right for a month after. But he made it. He made it because of you." Shaq swallowed the knot in his throat. "I didn't know who he was." "You didn't ask," Benton said. "You just acted. And you didn't stick around for credit. You disappeared. Quiet. Like it wasn't history." Shaq looked at him, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Your silence that day," Benton continued. "It was louder than any storm." The wind picked up just then, kicking dust across the lot and fluttering a torn flyer off a nearby post. Benton caught it midair, glanced at it, then let it go again. "You know what bothers me most?" Benton asked, motioning toward the building behind them. "It ain't just that they don't know who you are. It's that they don't want to know. That gym is built on memory foam floors and short-term thinking. Ain't room in there for legends, unless they come pre-verified and follow the dress code." Shaq cracked a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Griffin Knox," Benton said, saying the name like it left a bad taste. "Boy thinks he's a prophet, more concerned with followers than legacy." "He's got their attention," Shaq said. "For now," Benton replied. "But attention fades, legacy lingers." They stood quiet again, 2 men sharing coffee like a ceremony. Two survivors of different wars fought in the same neighborhood. You know, Benton said after a beat. I keep thinking about that photo on the wall inside. You saw it, didn't you? The one of the old court? Shaq nodded. They hang it like it's decoration. Like it's theirs to curate. But it ain't. It's ours. That photo? That's stolen memory. Shaq looked back at the building. For a moment he saw through the concrete, saw the rusted chain nets, the chipped blacktop, the chalk marks where his mother once taught him to pivot. They tried to erase the legend, Benton said. But legends don't fade. They just wait. Shaq looked at him, a quiet fire igniting behind his eyes. I'm not done, he said softly. Benton grinned again, then extended his hand. Shaq shook it firmly. Good, Benton said. 'Cause I think they just woke the lion. As Shaq climbed into his car and started the engine, Benton tipped his coffee toward him like a toast. Only a fool mocks a sleeping lion. And inside that gym, someone had just roared loud enough for the streets to start listening again. He entered Studio A through a side hallway, adjusting the discreet access badge clipped to his sleeve. A trainer brushed past him without so much as a glance. Perfect. From the corner of the room, Shaq stood behind the tempered glass partition and watched. Griffin Knox was in his element. Or pretending to be. He prowled the floor like a wolf in sneakers, correcting forms with dramatic flair, shouting "Let's go" so loud it echoed off the soundproof walls. Every gesture was designed for attention. Every movement a performance. The group around him, mostly young, impressionable, fit to be led types, hung on to his words like disciples. But not all were smiling. Shaq took notes. Not on paper, not in his phone. Mentally, observing more than just posture and programming. He watched how Griffin coached, the microaggressions, the subtle digs dressed up as tough love. A black man doing a pull-up was told, "We don't do prison reps here." A Latina woman adjusting her headband was told, "This ain't a beauty salon." One overweight member who lagged behind was called the anchor, with a chuckle that wasn't echoed by anyone else. None of it was loud enough to start a protest, but all of it was sharp enough to slice dignity just beneath the skin. Shaq had felt this brand of belittlement before, quiet racism masquerading as motivation, only noticed by the ones it was meant to wound. Still, Shaq noticed something else. Griffin checked the mirrors too much. Not just to adjust his form or watch his audience, but like a man watching for shadows. Like someone expecting to be caught. Every 10 minutes, Griffin's hand brushed over his pocket, checking his phone, like he was waiting for something, dreading it. And then it happened. A buzz. A pause. Griffin stiffened, pretending to stretch as he glanced down at the screen. For a second his mask cracked. Shaq watched as Griffin's breath caught in his chest. His lips tightened. He muttered something under his breath, turned away from the group, and walked toward the back exit of the studio. Shaq didn't follow, but he stepped closer, keeping his distance as Griffin stopped near the exit door, and took the call. "No, I told you I'm getting it wired this week. No, I don't care what the attorney said. I just need one more week." A pause. "I don't care if it's the second notice. I told you I can fix this." Another pause. "This place isn't just a gym, it's a brand. I have influence. If you kill my line of credit, you kill everything." His voice was low, desperate, frantic, but it told a story. Griffin Knox was drowning. Not physically, not visibly, but beneath the performance, beneath the brand, beneath the protein-packaged charisma, he was suffocating. Debt. Lawsuit. Something involving an attorney. Maybe back taxes. Maybe a failed investment. Whatever it was close enough to shake him. Shaq stepped back into the shadows of the hallway. Unseen, unnoticed. He leaned against the cool steel of the wall, and closed his eyes for a second. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. But truth had a shape. And Shaq was slowly tracing the edges. He returned to the glass partition just as Griffin re-entered the studio. His energy tighter now. Movements sharper, but hollower. He pushed his class harder. Extra reps. Less rest. More pressure. A young guy twisted his knee awkwardly, but Griffin waved it off with a, "You'll walk it off, this is where champions are made." Shaq's jaw tightened. This was the myth of control. The illusion of strength. Griffin wasn't leading from power. He was lashing out from panic. From fear. Shaq had seen it before, in men who were trying too hard to prove they belonged, who threw weight around when their hearts were hollow. It didn't excuse the damage, but it explained the desperation. He took one last look at Griffin, now pacing like a man trying to outwalk his own reflection. and stepped away. Outside, he removed the access badge, stuffed it into his jacket pocket, and made his way to the exit. He didn't need to see more. He'd seen enough. On his way out, he passed the front desk. The young woman from before looked up, gave a bored nod, not recognizing him in the slightest. "Have a good one, Mr. Lewis," she said. He smiled faintly, almost sad. "Yeah," he replied. "You too." As he stepped into the sunlight, Shaq pulled out his phone. No camera, no notes, just a quiet moment to think. He walked to his car not as a man preparing to retaliate, but as a man preparing to reveal. Griffin wasn't just a bully. He was a ticking clock. And Shaq wasn't going to stop him. He was going to outlast him. And the first blow wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be something stronger. Presence. He hadn't planned to be there. He was driving aimlessly, thinking. And his hands had turned the wheel without asking permission. And now he stood there, hoodie pulled tight against the chill, staring across the lot like a man sizing up something he once called home, and now barely recognized. The wind whipped around him, carrying with it old memories, the kind you didn't summon but which arrived anyway, uninvited, unrelenting. His knees ached, not from age, but memory, and the pavement beneath him whispered like it had something to say. The court had been different back then. High school, freshman year, winter tournament, one of the first road games against a suburban team, with too much funding and too little tolerance. The crowd had been loud, hostile, and full of coded language that wasn't as coded as the refs pretended. They booed when he touched the ball, called him names that echoed off the bleachers, and when he dunked clean, legal, electrifying, they called it a foul and sent him to the bench. After the game, he'd walked back to the school gym alone. Everyone else was already at the hotel. The court lights were still on, buzzing. He stepped onto the hardwood and stood in the center, then collapsed to his knees, fists clenched against the floor. Not because he lost, but because it didn't matter how well he played. He was always going to be too big, too loud, too black for them to see anything else. That was the night he almost quit. He remembered the tears, the silence, and then Lucille. She had followed him, quietly, found him crumpled in the middle of the gym floor, and didn't say a word at first. Just sat beside him, then placed her hand on his back like only a mother could. "You walk away. They win twice," she whispered. "Once when they break you, twice when you vanish." He hadn't vanished, but he had learned to make himself smaller, in other ways. Not physically, but in the places where it counted, dimming the light so others wouldn't feel threatened by its warmth. Now years later, he found himself standing again in front of a court. This one redesigned, renamed, rebranded, but haunted all the same. He stepped closer to the building, just a few feet from the glass, peered inside, and froze. There, inside Studio A, alone in the middle of the floor, was Griffin Knox. No cameras, no entourage, no curated energy. Just Griffin sitting on a plyo box, hunched forward, head in his hands. He was crying. It wasn't performative. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, broken. The kind of crying that came from exhaustion so deep it stopped caring about appearances. Shaq didn't move, didn't judge, just watched. Something about the sight stripped away the armor of resentment he had been slowly building. This wasn't the Griffin who called him big guy in mockery. This wasn't the smug trainer who barked at overweight teens, or smiled when someone flinched under judgment. This was a man cracking under the weight of something unseen. Shaq could have walked away, but something held him there. That's when the motion happened. Griffin reached into a small locker beside the turf, pulled out a gym duffel, and removed something from the bottom, a worn photo in a bent frame. He stared at it for a long time. Then he spoke, alone. "I didn't mean for it to be like this, man. I swear." Shaq couldn't hear the full words. Just fragments, but they were enough. He stayed there, unmoving, until Griffin tucked the photo back inside, wiped his face with his sleeve, and exhaled a shaky breath. He stood, rolled his shoulders, and limped toward the far door, disappearing behind it. Shaq waited 5 more minutes, then walked around the side of the building. The back alley held a security door, one Benton had told him about. Staff only, but Benton had left it ajar, just in case the lion ever wanted to walk through the fire. Shaq entered. The gym was silent, but it wasn't empty. He moved through the hallway slowly, until he reached the back wall of the studio. There, behind a series of frosted panels, he spotted Griffin's bag still open. He shouldn't have, but he stepped closer, not out of nosiness, out of instinct. The photo lay on top now, half visible. Shaq reached down, careful not to touch it. It was two boys, arms slung over each other. One clearly Griffin, smaller, softer, maybe 15. The other slightly older, taller, grin wide, and untouchable. On the back a note written in faded marker. Griff Quam Miles champs forever. Shaq felt something twist inside his chest. He stepped back as a low voice cut the air. You know him? Shaq turned. Griffin stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes bloodshot, voice raw. He didn't look angry, just exposed. Shaq didn't answer. Griffin stepped forward, eyes on the photo. That's my brother, Miles. He reached past Shaq, picked it up, held it with both hands like it might break if touched too roughly. He was everything. Better than me. Smarter. Stronger. Nicer. Played ball like magic. Real smooth. Like he didn't even try. Shaq remained silent, letting the words come as they needed. He got expelled junior year. Wrongly accused of stealing from the locker room. There was no proof. Just assumption. You know how that works. Shaq nodded once. They said he fit the description. Which just meant he was black. That's all it ever meant. Griffin swallowed hard. He spiraled after that, stopped going to school, got depressed, started drinking, started disappearing. And I thought if I could just become somebody, I could balance the scale, fix what they took from him. Shaq looked at the younger man. Saw it, now. Not just guilt, but grief fossilized into performance. You tried to fix it by becoming the thing that broke him, Shaq said softly. Griffin looked up, startled. You turned the system into your stage, played by its rules, mocked the ones it crushed. That's how you survived, isn't it? Griffin's mouth opened, closed. No defense came. Shaq stepped closer, not threatening, but steady. I get it. I've been there. I've wanted to disappear too. But not like that. Not by turning into the hand that shoved you. Griffin dropped his gaze. Shaq continued. You're not the only one with ghosts in the iron. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was healing. It was the kind that came when wounds were finally named aloud. Shaq turned, began walking back toward the hallway. You're drowning, he said over his shoulder. But you're not sunk, not yet. Griffin didn't follow. Shaq exited the building quietly. Outside the air had changed. Warmer. Or maybe it was just the weight that had shifted. The ghosts didn't disappear. But they weren't haunting anymore. They were listening. Shaq had returned under the same alias. Mr. Harrison, walking in with a towel slung around his shoulder, and no expectations. He hadn't planned to stay long. His intent was observation again. Maybe 30 minutes, nothing more. But the mood was different today, and sometimes the atmosphere told you to stay. He kept to the far edge of Studio C, a space that mostly drew solo lifters and people who didn't want to be filmed by ambitious influencers. The mirror wall was partially smudged, and the row of free weights had a slight bend in its rack, a small imperfection in an otherwise curated gym. Shaq liked it for that very reason. He was doing slow shoulder presses when he noticed a woman across the room, adjusting her wrist wraps beside a squat rack. Noticed not because she was loud or showy, but because she moved like she belonged, like she wasn't performing. Janelle West. He'd seen her a few times before. Medium height, sharp eyes, hair pulled into a no-nonsense braid, always dressed in dark navy or earth tones, never the flashy neons everyone else wore. She trained with precision, not vanity. She wasn't there to chase aesthetics. She was there to build. Shaq watched as a younger guy, maybe 20, wiry and unsure, struggled with a front squat beside her. His elbows were too low, knees caving in, posture crumbling. The kid's trainer was nowhere in sight, clearly more concerned with a client on camera at the far end. Shaq stepped forward, gently, and said just one word to the kid as he approached. Pause. The young man froze. Startled. Shaq crouched beside the bar, careful not to make a scene. He didn't touch him, didn't command, just spoke quietly. Lift your chest, drive through the heels, elbows higher. You got this. One more rep. The kid nodded, reset, and completed the movement cleanly this time. He looked over with a surprised grin, a quiet thanks. Shaq nodded once, and backed away. You're not bad at hiding, Janelle said, approaching from the side. Shaq glanced over. Calm. Hiding? She smirked. Mr. Harrison. Huh? Subtle, but you correct form like a man who's been studied his whole life. and you walk like you're used to being remembered. Shaq gave a half smile. Could say the same about you. She extended her hand. Janelle West. He shook it. Pleasure. I'm a therapist, she added. I watch people. Doesn't take long to spot someone carrying weight that's not on the bar. Shaq chuckled. And what gave me away? The silence, she said simply. People who've been loud their whole lives don't go this quiet unless they've been hurt. They stood beside the weight bench. Conversation forming naturally. No pretense. No performance. I used to be a teacher, Janelle said. Now I run a trauma recovery group. Mostly young men. Some just out of juvie. Some fresh off emotional burnouts, anger issues, abandonment, manipulation. All kinds of ghosts. Shaq nodded slowly. That's heavy work. Not compared to yours, she said, meeting his eyes. What you did for that kid just now. That's what we're missing in here. Trainers chase aesthetics. Kids need anchors. They need someone bigger than weights to lift them. Shaq didn't respond right away. Her words landed. Janelle lowered her voice. I'm not gonna out you, Mr. O'Neill. But if you're gonna be here for real. There's a difference between observing and showing up. Shaq crossed his arms. Thoughtful. You inviting me to join something? She raised a brow. I'm inviting you to matter. I run a private session every Thursday night in the studio across the lot. No names. No cameras. Just boys with broken pieces who need to hear that strength isn't noise.
He considered it. You want me to speak?
I want you to be seen by kids who need to know quiet power still exists. Shaq leaned back against the rack. What if I'm not ready to be seen again? Janelle smiled. Then don't be you. Be Mr. Harrison. Just show up. They stood in mutual understanding for a long moment. No handshake deal. Just silence that confirmed something unspoken had been sealed. All right, Shaq said finally. Thursday. She nodded. Thursday. As she turned to walk away, Shaq stopped her with a quiet question. Why do you care? Janelle looked over her shoulder, gaze steady. Because my brother was one of those kids, and nobody showed up in time. Shaq didn't ask more. He didn't need to. As she disappeared toward the stretching area, Shaq exhaled slowly. The iron hadn't felt as heavy today. Not because he lifted more, but because someone had noticed he was carrying. This time, he wouldn't disappear. He'd show up. The core's gleaming hallways hummed with anticipation. The kind of electric buzz that only arrived when spectacle was promised. Posters for the annual Power and Prove event had gone up across the gym's digital boards a week prior. Bright graphics, fiery slogans, a promise of battle dressed in fitness branding. One arena, one day. No excuse. The tagline pulsed above a list of registered trainers and high-ranking gym members, framed like a fight card. Right at the top, bold and cocky as ever, Griffin Knox, the titan of turf. This was Griffin's domain. His show. His yearly performance where he got to stand before a crowd of followers, call out challengers, and remind everyone why he held the crown. It wasn't just about strength. It was status, spectacle, and the silent social currency of being the gym's unchallenged alpha. And this year he'd made sure to amplify the noise. 3 days out, Griffin posted a slick, heavily edited teaser on his socials. Slow-motion clips of him flipping tires, barking orders, and smirking into the camera. The caption, "They say the past is heavy. I say leave it under the bar. Let's see if any legends are brave enough to show up." That last line wasn't subtle. It was a direct shot. The buzz rippled through the core's members-only forums. Someone mentioned a rumor about a mystery old guy showing up on the registration list under a forgotten name. Others joked it was probably a local coach looking for clout. A few brought up Miss Harrison, the quiet observer who had been hanging around recently. And then the registration list was updated, publicly. Right there between elite trainers and club regulars. Shaq O'Neill, guest competitor. It was real. No alias. No disguise. Griffin saw it the moment it went live. His jaw clenched. His eyes scanned the staff lounge, as though searching for someone to blame. "You put that in as a joke, right?" he asked one of the coordinators. She shook her head, confused. It came through clean. Legit ID and waiver. Corporate already cleared it. Griffin forced a laugh. "Okay. All right. We're bringing in retired giants now. Nostalgia's a hell of a drug." He posted again that evening. "Guess some ghosts don't know when to stay buried. But hey, everyone's welcome to the arena. Even the ones who creak when they walk." That was his mistake. Because Janelle West saw the post. and Janelle didn't miss. She snapped a screenshot and posted it with a caption of her own. Might want to Google him first. It hit the algorithm like gasoline to flame. By morning, the internet had noticed. Videos surfaced. Clips of Shaq's historic plays, his philanthropic speeches, quiet moments captured from interviews long forgotten. Quotes about humility. Clips of him helping teens rebuild hurricane shelters. Footage of him carrying groceries for strangers in storm-struck neighborhoods. The contrast was glaring. Griffin, the influencer, shouting into a mirror. Shaq, the quiet legend, returning with dignity. Memes followed. Side by sides. Edits. The hashtag #DigShaqReturns started trending regionally. Then nationally. Even ESPN reposted the story. The Core's event page tripled its RSVP count overnight. Griffin went silent online. But inside the gym, he doubled down. Longer hours. More reps. Loud pep talks to staff. Barking orders in sessions. Every move screamed desperation disguised as dominance. Meanwhile, Shaq said nothing. He arrived the morning of the event in an unbranded tracksuit, a simple duffel over his shoulder. No entourage. Janelle met him outside the gates with a nod. "Crowd's big," she said. Shaq tilted his head. "It's not about the crowd," she smiled. "I know." Inside, the gym was transformed. Lighting rigs had been installed. A makeshift arena was laid out in the center, with turf lanes, platforms, and obstacle stations. Spectators lined the glass walls. Phones were already filming. Live feeds buzzed with anticipation. Griffin paced near the back, eyes scanning the room like a man watching an empire shake. Shaq walked in with no announcement. But the moment he entered, silence fell. Then whispered. Then applause. He didn't bow, didn't wave. He just found a bench, placed his bag down, and began warming up, calm as the eye of a storm. Griffin approached a staff member. "We're still doing standard events, right? Timed sled push, deadlift ladder, overhead circuit." "Yeah," the staffer replied. "But there's been a change. Corporate added a mentor round, partner drills with lower-tier members. Crowd votes on impact." Griffin scoffed. "What is this, gym school?" The staffer shrugged. "It's charity, man. They want engagement." Griffin turned away, jaw tight. The events began. Griffin was dominant. Of course, fast, powerful, precise. He crushed the sled, flew through the ladders, racked up points. But something was off. The cheers weren't as loud. The applause was scattered. Eyes drifted. Cameras panned. Because when Shaq stepped onto the field, the mood shifted. He didn't sprint. He didn't shout. But he lifted with grace, paced himself, encouraged others, helped a young woman who dropped a barbell, spotted a boy whose grip slipped, gave quiet nods of reassurance to those no one else was watching. During the mentor round, a teenage kid named Avery was paired with Shaq, nervous, shaking, clearly untrained. Griffin rolled his eyes. But Shaq knelt down, looked Avery in the eye, and said only one thing. "You belong here." By the end of their round, Avery hit a personal best. The room erupted. Shaq didn't celebrate. He just gave Avery a fist bump. That moment, captured on 10 different phones, reposted 1,000 times before the event ended, was the knockout. Griffin's reps were higher. Shaq's presence was heavier. When the crowd vote was tallied, Shaq won by a landslide. No trophy, no confetti, just respect. The kind Griffin couldn't demand, because in the arena they built for ego. Someone brought back legacy. And no one was ready. He stepped off his station, mid-set, walked across the floor, not rushed, not dramatic, just with purpose. Griffin shouted something, but no one caught it. The cameras turned. Shaq reached the boy, crouched down, and gently without fanfare, lifted the bar just enough for the boy to slide out. The boy gasped, eyes welling. He sat up, visibly shaken. Shaq knelt beside him, placed one hand on the boy's shoulder. Didn't say much, just nodded. Reassured, present. The room was silent. Then a wave of applause started. Not loud, not explosive, but real. Pure. It built, carried across the room like a slow-moving anthem. Shaq stood, helped the boy to his feet, made sure he was okay. Griffin, still mid-lift, stood stunned. His set was still in progress, but no one cared. One of the volunteers whispered to him, "You should have stopped too." Griffin looked around. The crowd wasn't watching the scoreboard. They were watching Shaq, not for reps, for who he was. No one cared that he didn't finish the gauntlet. No one cared that Griffin technically completed more rounds. Shaq hadn't come to win a contest. He'd come to shift a culture, and he had done it, in silence. Later, after the floor cleared and the lights dimmed, someone tried to hand Shaq a trophy. He declined. Instead, he pointed to the boy. "Give it to him," Shaq said. He got back up. The crowd cheered. Griffin, from the sidelines, stood hollow. The roar wasn't his anymore. The spotlight had moved. But Shaq? He just stepped into the crowd. No speeches, no curtain call. The silence followed him like a crown. Not one of noise, but one of presence. And in that moment, everyone understood. Some men lift iron, but some lift others. And that kind of strength doesn't fade. The next morning, the city of Atlanta woke up, not to headlines about a competition, but to a moment. A 27-second video clip had exploded across social media platforms overnight, uploaded by an anonymous spectator and reshared by fitness pages, basketball fan accounts, and mental health advocates alike. It wasn't footage of the lifts, not the gauntlet, not Griffin's barked command. It was something simpler, quieter. It was Shaquille O'Neal walking off a championship platform mid-set to lift a barbell off the chest of a trembling teenage boy and kneeling beside him without speaking a word. The caption read, "When giants protect, not perform." Within hours, the video had amassed millions of views. The comments weren't just likes and fire emojis. They were testimonies. A true Hoops 84. He didn't hesitate. That's what strength looks like.
A lift with Lenny. This is what every gym should be. Safe. Human. Real.
I am the boy. I was gonna quit today, until he saw me, and made me feel like I belonged. That last one hit hardest. A quiet post with a simple selfie, the same boy from the footage, holding a small gym towel in one hand. Tears dried on his cheek. His eyes looked both grateful and unsure, like he was still trying to believe what had happened. That post alone shattered the internet. ESPN picked up the story, then Bleacher Report. CNN ran a short segment. Shaq's unexpected moment of grace goes viral. It played on a loop in airport lounges and morning talk shows. But inside the core, it was chaos. Griffin Knox stood in the gym office, pacing behind a glass wall, while a PR rep tried desperately to manage the fallout. The overnight numbers didn't lie. Followers were dropping from Griffin's social media by the thousands per hour. Sponsors were distancing. Affiliates paused deals. He'd posted twice already, trying to explain. The first was a photo of him holding a young competitor's hand with a caption, "We're all here to lift each other." The second was a pre-recorded video about gym culture and humility. Neither worked. The comments shredded him. "I lift justice. You bullied people on the floor for clout. Then got humbled in real time. I say no to toxic trainers. We saw who you were when you didn't know you were being watched." Griffin stared at his phone, knuckles white. The control he'd built his brand on was slipping through his fingers like chalk dust. Meanwhile, upstairs in the boardroom, the gym's owner, Connor Arledge, a silver-haired investor with a background in tech and not fitness, tapped his pen against the marble table. "Do you have any idea what kind of PR liability this is?" he said to the marketing lead, his tone sharp. "We're trying damage control, but the narrative belongs to him now," she replied, pulling up the live engagement charts. Connor leaned back in his chair. "Get him in here. Shaquille, bring him in. We need to flip this before it sinks us." But Shaq didn't respond to their email, didn't return the DM from the gym account, didn't answer calls from Griffin's personal number, which by then had gone completely dark. Instead, that afternoon, he sat quietly in a coffee shop across the street with Janelle West and Benton Reese. The three of them shared a corner booth tucked between brick walls and sunlight. The mood wasn't celebratory. It was contemplative. Janelle sipped slowly from her mug, watching him. "You know they're gonna offer you the spotlight." Shaq shrugged. "Let them. You planning to take it?" He shook his head, not interested in being the headline. "I've done that dance. It don't feed the people who need it." Benton tapped his cane lightly on the ground. "They want a poster boy. But you already gave them a mirror." Shaq looked out the window toward the gym. He didn't hate Griffin. Not anymore. Not after what he'd seen behind the mask. But he wasn't about to play pawn in their redemption arc either. His phone buzzed again, another media outlet requesting a statement. He ignored it. "I don't want this moment to be about me," he said finally. "I want it to move something." Janelle leaned in. "Then let's move it." That evening, during a hastily arranged press call at the core, Connor Arledge stood at the podium in front of a row of gym banners, flanked by nervous staff. "We'd like to formally apologize to Mr. O'Neill for any prior misunderstandings and acknowledge the incredible moment of compassion and leadership he displayed during our event," he read, clearly scripted. "We are proud to have hosted him and invite him to lead a new community initiative through the core brand." Before he could finish, his assistant stepped in and whispered something urgently into his ear. Connor blinked, stepped aside, and allowed the screen behind him to change. It was a live feed of Shaq. He wasn't in the room. He was at Janelle's trauma center, seated beside her, and a small group of boys in folding chairs. Casual, humble, grounded. He spoke into the camera with the same calm that had silenced arenas. "I appreciate the words," he said, "but I don't need a campaign. What I need is for this moment to matter beyond views." He gestured to the boys beside him. Teenagers, some with bandages, some in hand-me-down hoodies, some looking down at their shoes. These young men are the ones who carry weight, every day. Not on their backs. In their hearts. What we do with our platforms should lift them. He turned slightly, addressing the gym owner directly now. "I'm declining the offer, but I've got a better one. Take all the funds raised from Power and Prove, every ticket, every stream, every ad dollar, and send it right here, to this center. Let's put strength where it actually belongs." The feed ended. The press room was silent. Not with awkwardness. With awe. By morning, headlines read differently. "Shaq turns down spotlight, shines it on forgotten youth. From iron to impact. One man's quiet revolution." The core, in a last-ditch move to salvage reputation, issued a follow-up statement, pledging $250,000 to Janelle's center. Sponsors followed. Donations flooded in. The center, once scraping by, now had enough to expand programs for 2 years. And Shaq? He disappeared from the trending page the same way he entered it. Gracefully, quietly, completely, because he didn't need to win the moment. He had given it away. And in doing so, the crowd that once came for performance stayed for purpose. "I knew the man, not the brand," he said. "That makes all the difference." Inside the break room, Janelle West sat with a group of teens gathered in a loose circle. Some sat on yoga mats. Others leaned against foam rollers. There was no therapist's desk, just conversation. She wore her trademark calm, her voice grounding. "You can't bench press shame," she told them. "You gotta talk it down. Let it walk itself out." They nodded, not because they understood everything, but because they understood her. She didn't talk at them. She built space around them. At the center's back office, Shaq sat behind a desk that didn't look like it belonged to a CEO. It was scratched, mismatched with the chair. No nameplate. Just a coffee mug that read, "Coach, not Savior." He wasn't alone. A knock on the open door brought him to look up. Griffin Knox stood there, unsure of his own feet. He wasn't in core pro gear anymore. He wore a plain hoodie, frayed at the sleeves, hands stuffed in his pockets. The arrogance had burned off him, leaving something quieter behind. Shaq nodded, the faintest trace of a smile. Griffin didn't try to explain himself, didn't apologize. He simply said, "I don't know what I'm good at anymore, but I want to help." Shaq rose, walked past him, and motioned toward the back hallway. "Come on," he said. "Help unload the mats. We've got kids coming in." That was it. No speech, no forgiveness ceremony, just an invitation to work. Griffin followed, and from that day forward, he never missed a session. He started by sweeping the gym floor. Later, he helped run breathwork drills. Eventually, he asked Janelle if he could sit in on the trauma recovery group. Not as a coach, but as a student. He didn't post about it once. 2 weeks in, the core's owner, Connor Arledge, showed up with a check and a camera crew. Shaq met him at the door. Connor smiled too wide. "We'd love to collaborate, film a legacy series, get a Core X Lucille program started." Shaq pointed to a sign that read, "No cameras, real lives inside." "We already got the only legacy we need," he said, and closed the door gently. What followed wasn't viral, it wasn't dramatic, but it was steady. Teens started showing up after school. Not all of them looking for weights. Some just needed a couch, a sandwich, a story that wasn't polished. One day, a 12-year-old named Caleb arrived with his hoodie pulled low and arms crossed. He barely spoke, but after 2 weeks of watching, he asked to spot someone on the sled push. Another, Malik, was on probation for vandalism. He stayed behind one evening to mop the floor. Unasked. The center had no bells or whistles. But it had something better, belief. Then one Thursday a boy no older than 10 stood in front of the mural wall beside Benton, pointing up at the giant photo of Shaq. "Who's that?" he asked. Benton crouched beside him, rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That's the man who lifted us all," he said softly, eyes glinting, without ever raising his voice. The boy stared longer, then nodded, like he understood. Outside, the sun slipped behind the edge of the roof, casting long shadows across the street. Inside, the light stayed on. Not bright, but warm. The kind that didn't demand attention, only gave it. That was the legacy. Not headlines, not trophies, not applause, but the whisper passed from hand to heart. That strength, when real, never needed to shout, only to show up. If this story moved you, ask yourself, who's the quiet strength in your life? Who lifted you when no one was watching? Now it's your turn. Pay it forward. Build the spaces they never had. Because real strength, it's not what you show, it's what you pass on.